Before we get started, just a quick reminder that the ArtBreak program will be on hiatus in June and July, but we look forward to coming back in August. And meanwhile, our regular programs will continue, such as gallery gatherings and artful evenings and other Thursday night programs. We have a number of exciting programs coming up soon, so if you've not already, I encourage you to grab a flyer from the side table on your way out, and also check out our web calendar for more information. Now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Christine Hahn, who will be speaking about architect Mies van der Rohe and the architectural design of the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts. So we're very excited to have her talking about a topic that's very, of course, near and dear to us. Dr. Hahn is a professor of art history and the art department chair at Kalamazoo College. She received both her MA and Ph.D. from the University of Chicago and has shared her work with local, national, and international audiences. She was the recipient of a Fulbright Research Fellowship in 2002, spending the year in Seoul, South Korea. Dr. Hahn's research focuses on 20th century art, examining how the circulation of art via expatriate artists, traveling exhibitions, and the museum space creates multi-layered meanings for global audiences. We are thrilled to have Dr. Hahn back speaking with us today. Please join me in offering her a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts, and in particular, Dr. Miriam Thomas, Associate Curator for Adult Education, who has invited me back. I was telling her that this is really one of my favorite places to speak. Not only is it a gorgeous space, just designed to look at art historical images together, but the audience that is here is always just so curious and interested, and so I'm so pleased to be back here today. I wander, but I'm really going to try hard not to wander and talk into the mic, because I just want to give a shout out to my students who are live streaming today, or they may be watching at a later time, but I do want to say thank you to my students for releasing me from my classroom duties to teach them in a different venue today. We would have been talking about performance art in class. So here we are. Let's see. I'm like, ooh, I have to acquaint myself here. Okay, so the genesis of this talk really happened last year, when almost exactly this time in May of 2024, I was here talking about Building 88. Building 88 was a Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill designed building that has since been demolished, but was the original headquarters, not the original, but was the headquarters for John, and was completed in the early 1960s. And so for a very long period of time, it served as the world headquarters for Upjohn Pharmaceuticals. This was just a gorgeous building, and I'm showing some photographs to remind us of what we've lost here in Kalamazoo. This was designed by the preeminent firm, Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, and all of the photography that you see was taken by Ezra Stoller, one of the most prominent photographers of the mid part of the 20th century. Here is another shot here. And in that talk, I talked about the sort of low slung horizontal lines, the perforation between interior and exterior space. And these were all coming out of this idea in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s about free-flowing open space that was able to be created by these steel posts that Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, in conjunction to their relationship with Mies van der Rohe, who I'll be talking about in a little bit, really pioneered in the use of low-slung structures as well as high ones. So Bruce Graham was the lead architect for Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, based in Chicago, but obviously an international firm that is still working today. You might know his work better as the lead architect behind the John Hancock Tower, pictured here. And then Fazlur Khan is pictured next to him on your far left-hand side. The two of them worked hand in hand to build some of the tallest structures in the world. But Fazlur Khan said that he and Bruce Graham loved the low-slung horizontal ones even more than the tallest ones, because you could span great horizontal distances in the same way that you would use that same technology to go up. Fazlur Khan and Bruce Graham are just some of the luminaries that were in Kalamazoo in the 1960s. D.S. Gilmore, who was the CEO of Upjohn Corporation, brought just tremendous artists, graphic designers, architects to Kalamazoo during this period of time. And pictured here is Will Burton, who was the internal communications director for all of the visual material that Upjohn Pharmaceutical was doing during this period of time. He designed Scope magazine, where you see a cover of that there. Upjohn was really a pioneer in using soft advertising and marketing their medications around the world. They also pioneered using exhibitions and installations and museum galleries. They had an installation at the Smithsonian, they had an installation at Walt Disney World, and they would send these traveling exhibitions designed by Burton to medical conferences around the country. They were also the first company to use satellite television for holding global meetings across their various offices located in Mexico, Australia, and England. So they really were thinking about communication through visual material at a point in time when they were pretty much the first to be thinking about this. As a result, D.S. Gilmore and the Upjohn Company worked hand in hand with the United States Information Agency to send a tour of Kalamazoo across the globe over a 6-year period of time. Kalamazoo was selected as this sort of model of the small American city. And so it was designed to showcase American life around the world. And I had a chance to speak with now sadly passed away, but at the time he was a high school student in Kalamazoo, and he recalled getting to be sent on this tour. It was his first time being overseas, and his job as a high school student was to hand out pamphlets for the exhibition as it traveled to London, Berlin, and it was just an extraordinary experience. So this exhibition was a really fascinating one. There was a film that was associated with it, and it really kind of introduced Kalamazoo as the model city, a model United States city to countries around the world. So lots going on in Kalamazoo in the 1950s and 60s, and the Kalamazoo Art Center started even prior to that period of time in 1924. So last year was the centennial to celebrate the Kalamazoo Art Center. Over the years, the Art Center was located in various locations near downtown. It was housed in a couple of different structures. And when Upjohn was building its headquarters, D.S. Gilmore at that time decided to ask Skidmore, Owings & Merrill if it would design a new art center, a community center in Kalamazoo for the Art Center. So this art center was fairly unique for its time because you had the model of the Fine Arts Museum, but this community art center combined the art school, so the teaching of art, alongside the exhibitions of artworks. And up on the screen here, you see the original facade for the Art Center, which has since been changed. And then some photographs of D.S. Gilmore and Genevieve Gilmore. You might also know them from D.S. Gilmore's car collection, which is out in Richland, and you can still visit today. There they are pictured in that middle photograph at the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts. And then D.S. Gilmore and Genevieve Gilmore brought many visiting artists, and just a photograph of the host of different types of classes that they held. This one was an art class for returning veterans from World War II. So how does this all connect back to Mies van der Rohe? Mies van der Rohe was an architect from Germany who was the final head of the Bauhaus school in Germany, which was closed down in the 1930s by the Nazi government, who was very allergic to modernism and modern art and design. So after the Bauhaus closed, and the Bauhaus was this revolutionary art school that many of our art programs are now modeled on. It was an interdisciplinary program where your foundational courses, you were trained in textiles, the graphic arts, as well as painting, sculpture. There was no differentiation between this idea of high art and low art. It was meant to really teach you in the training of technical skills, whether it was being applied to graphic design or whether it was being applied to an oil painting. So Mies van der Rohe moves to the United States in the 1930s and becomes the dean of the School of Architecture at the Illinois Institute of Technology. His students go on to seed every major architectural firm in the United States and globally between the 1930s and the 1960s. And many of his students end up being lead architects at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. So you might be familiar with Mies van der Rohe from projects around Chicago and New York. Here pictured is the Chicago Federal Plaza, where it's still working as that today. You might have to go there if you need your passport renewed. And let me just tell you a little bit about Mies van der Rohe and the international style of architecture. So this is the Farnsworth House. You can visit that in Plano, Illinois, which is just a couple of hours from here. I'm trying to not digress too much, but there's a lot of funny stories related to Edith Farnsworth and Mies van der Rohe. They sued each other. The house took ages to complete. It turned out later that they were having this closeted affair that nobody knew about. But in the Farnsworth house, you see the principles of international style architecture. Here, just for my students, these are the three sort of prominent early 20th century international style architects, Walter Gropius, Mies van der Rohe, and Le Corbusier. And their style was characterized by emphasizing volume over mass. So moving away from that really masonry structure, that heavy, weighty expression of the exterior facade, and instead creating these large, expanses of diaphanous windows, these translucent perforations between interior and exterior, and all of this is made possible by those steel posts that lift the structures up off the ground and give that sort of sense of volume and airy weightlessness underneath. So in 1929, Mies van der Rohe designs this structure here, the Barcelona Pavilion. And the Barcelona Pavilion was actually the German pavilion for the Barcelona International Exposition. This was not meant to be a residence or used in any sort of functional way, but it's really Mies's expression of that ideal of free-flowing space. You can see that he's using a lot of glass, steel, marble as the structural elements of his pavilion. You're also seeing echoes of a movement of the early 1920s and 30s. Some call it neoplasticism. It's also known as de style. This is a painting by Mondrian. But when you think about the 1930s in Europe, it's really a period of time where artists are coming out of the irrationality of World War I, seeing the destruction that was created by that war. And they're really seeking universal answers, this idea that universal communication is possible through art, mathematics. And so it's this type of painting, this really stripped down, unadorned use of primary colors and grid-like fashions is absolutely linked to Mies van der Rohe's own desire to find a modern architectural language that can be universal. The pavilion was meant to host the emissaries and eminent guests of the International Exposition. And so there's kind of a funny photograph here of everybody having hors d'oeuvres in front of this marble wall. But what I want to illustrate here is that Mies van der Rohe is thinking about free-flowing open spaces that are punctuated by material that is functioning as a wall, but still the material itself. So what do I mean by that? The travertine marble, or sorry, not the travertine, but the marble wall that you're seeing there really is just a huge piece of marble. The Barcelona chairs, which are sort of ubiquitous in mid-century decor these days, they're named such because they were designed by Mies van der Rohe for the Barcelona International Exposition. Mies van der Rohe really sought to create this perforation between interior and exterior spaces. And so here you see this large glass wall, and then this expanse that's leading out to a courtyard where you have this sculpture within this reflective glass pool. And then you see, just to get a sense of scale, visitors looking at that sculpture. So he was thinking about vistas and vantage points where you're going to encounter things that are indoors and outdoors, but they all become part of this, this expression and experience of free-flowing space. Here on this floor plan, you get a sense of just how open the structure was. It's really punctuated just by several steel beams. And then you have this graphic, it almost looks like a de style painting in looking at the expression of the floor plan there. And here is an model overview, so you can get a sense of how simple the construction was. Mies said that structures should consist of a floor, steel columns, and a roof capping it all. So it's just really this very open, light-filled space. So in 1943, Architectural Forum puts together this issue that is dedicated to architecture for a small American city. And they commissioned projects from architects, a variety of different architects, and their purpose was to design for these fast-growing cities in the United States. And here the example that they use is Syracuse, New York. So just really fascinating investigations into city plan, traffic, all of us who are living with the sort of reorganization of the Kalamazoo city streets. You can see sort of all of the thought that goes into trying to figure out how to organize roads around a city. So one of those plans was for a high school, and I just introduced that here just to demonstrate for those of you who went to high school when I did. The high school might look very, very similar to a place that you might have gone to. There's a tremendous amount of school building that was happening in the 1960s and 70s. And so your high school may have looked much like that one. If you're familiar with Loy Norrix, it's a very, very similar type of expression of high school, even though it's been renovated and adjusted over the years. And then, of course, you've got Mies van der Rohe's submission for a museum for a small city, which is pictured there on the right. And I'm going to blow up some of those so that you can see them in better detail. This museum for a small city had been on Mies van der Rohe's mind for quite some time before it was published in 1943. Here you have a photograph of Mies working with his architecture students, and pictured on your very far left is George Danforth. George Danforth was a jazz musician, but also an architect who goes on to become the dean of the School of Architecture at Illinois Institute of Technology after Mies retires. And just aside about George Danforth, I can't think of a better place for him to be than Chicago in the 1950s and 60s. He talks about he was living in Europe and he got a telegram that said that Benny Goodman and Mies van der Rohe were going to be in Chicago, and he just hopped on a plane and moved to Chicago. So George Danforth was a graduate student when Mies was thinking through these plans for a museum for a small city, and produces quite a few sketches, elevations, drawings, and plans, working with Mies to develop these concepts. You can see here in the student project for a small art museum that Danforth is, like Mies van der Rohe, thinking about free-flowing open space, allowing for a great deal of flexibility. And when you think about the artwork being produced in the 1950s, a lot of it was extremely large. It basically was larger than the wall itself. There's a story of Barnett Newman having to cut his canvas off of its frame and roll it up because it just wouldn't fit into any of the doors of the gallery where he was showing his works. So you have artists and architects really thinking about this ideal museum space, allowing the works to become the wall, where there's no distraction from these surrounding other objects, but instead you're focused in on the wall. And Danforth often would use, he doesn't in this example, although you have the example of this large abstract painting, he would often use Picasso's Guernica, because Guernica was such an extremely large painting that you can see the relationship between the painting and its existence as a wall. And then on the right-hand side is Mies van der Rohe's sketch for Architectural Forum. So Mies's plan for a museum for a small city was many people took notice of it. In particular, you see here Jackson Pollock and Peter Blake. Jackson Pollock and Blake really adopt Mies's ideas for the small museum in designing their ideal museum, the ideal museum in which to showcase Jackson Pollock's work. And then in 1968, Mies van der Rohe has the opportunity to construct the new National Gallery in Berlin. And architectural critics have said that while the original plans for the Museum for a Small City were never actually realized, that the new gallery, the new National Gallery, comes the closest to reaching Mies's fullest expression of that space. So here you have an interior shot of the new National Gallery. Please note the date, 1968. I'll come back to that in a minute, but I just want to show these examples. Everywhere that you're going to do research on the Museum for a Small City, you're going to see this language. Museum for a Small City is named after an unrealized museum designed by architect Mies van der Rohe. This project series documents Mies van der Rohe's concept design of the unexecuted, there's a typo there, project. This is from the Canadian Architectural Archives. And then up at the very top, architecture and measurement coverage of Mies van der Rohe's unrealized Museum for a Small City project. So this is just a small sampling. If you Google Museum for a Small City, Mies van der Rohe, you're just going to get hit after hit of this unrealized, unexecuted project by Mies van der Rohe, with its closest cousin being the new National Gallery in Berlin. Well, little do architectural scholars know that it was realized, and it was realized in 1964 with the design of the Kalamazoo Arts Center. So pictured here is the original facade again, and then a photograph of D.S. Gilmore and Genevieve Gilmore standing in front of the new building. So in the following, I'm going to make the argument that this is the realization of Mies van der Rohe's original plan. You can tell me at the end how convincing I am. So in the essay that Mies van der Rohe writes for the Architectural Forum article, he says, "The Museum for a Small City should not emulate its metropolitan counterparts." What does he mean by that? So pictured up top, you've got the facades of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the Museum of Fine Arts in Philadelphia, and then the Detroit Institute of Arts in Detroit. And what you're going to notice about all of these is that they are based on a temple to art structure that was created by the industrialist barons who wanted to sort of emulate the temple of art in the United States. There's always a huge set of stairs to try to get to the entryway, although that's been ameliorated with renovations in recent years. But you can see this idea that you are processing upwards to pay homage to these great works of art. But for the Museum for a Small City, Mies didn't want that. He writes, "The first problem is to establish the museum as a center for the enjoyment, not the interment of art." So here you can see that he focuses on an entryway that is level with the street level. There's no climbing up a huge set of stairs to pay homage to the works that are created within. And furthermore, Mies van der Rohe is adopting language that began with the first Museum of Modern Art in the United States, or really anywhere during this period of time, which is Goodwin and Stone's design for the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. And Goodwin and Stone were thinking about the experience of people unfamiliar with modern art. And they developed this design with this window facade at the street level so that it would mimic in many ways the shop experience, the shopping and engagement with things inside museums. So to kind of lure you in, they had this vast expanse of windows on the very first floor so that you would feel comfortable sort of entering into that space. You can see similarly that in this particular design here, that the gift shop was originally located on that curtain glass facade right at the street level. Again, to really sort of lure you in to a space that you might otherwise feel a little bit intimidated by. I wanted to bring forward this comparison here because while Building 88 was being constructed, it's pretty, I'm assuming that D.S. Gilmore hired the same consultant for the interior furnishings of both Building 88 and the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts. Those of you who heard me last year might remember that Gilmore was very suspicious of Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill's interior furnishings and designs, and basically behind their backs hired a consultant out of Grand Rapids, Hollis Baker. And there's just copious notes of the back and forth between the two of them because Gilmore really wanted the furniture to be comfortable. He was like, none of this low-backed, non-tufted nonsense. The furniture has to be comfortable. We have to be able to sit in it and relax. And so you can see the correspondences here that despite the building itself being this ultra modern, spare design, the interior furnishings were comfortable, padded, and resemble the interior furnishings of a domestic space. Again, this is very much in line with design elements and choices that curators were making to make modern art and the experience of modern art more accessible and less intimidating to viewers. As a community center, artists were brought in, a lot of visiting speakers. And so this is a photograph of Walt Disney visiting the Kalamazoo Arts Center with the director of the museum during the time period that the building was created. That's Alfred Maurice up there. And Alfred Maurice is a fascinating artist in his own right. He was a painter, photographer, a printmaker, and I'm just sort of in love with his work. Maybe that's my next talk. Okay, so let's walk through the floor plan. So on the right-hand side, you've got the floor plan that Mies van der Rohe created for the Architectural Forum Museum for a Small City. And on the left-hand side is the floor plan for the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts. And I'm gonna just walk you through both of these floor plans together. So notice how the entryway for both are offset to the left-hand side. So you can see that low set of staircases in the Mies version and then in the KIA's floor plan. So you enter into that space, notice the juxtaposition of those brick walls. And then on the right-hand side, if you see the number 9 on Mies's plan, that is a reflective pool. The reflective pool at the KIA, you'll notice, is right in the same spot. So you enter into the museum space, you've got this free-flowing open plan with the spare use of steel columns punctuating the space. This was the idea that it would be a flexible space with floating walls. And then if you move to the back of the building, that rectangle at the top, so on your left-hand floor plan, at the top, you'll see a rectangle way at the top. That is the sculpture court that is replicated on the right-hand side with that enclosed courtyard in Mies's plan. So you can walk through the site plan and see how this design is replicating in many ways Mies's original plan for the Museum for a Small City. One of the preeminent points of Mies's museum was this idea of floating walls. floating walls that could contain very, very large artworks, but that the floating walls could also interchange, move around. And so what you have here is the mimicking of these floating walls with these black bands at the top and the bottom of the wall to create this, the exhibition hanging space seems to kind of float between those two black bands. And so you can see that replicated throughout all of the gallery spaces in the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts. And there's this lovely painting by Otto Stauffenberg that depicts a gallery space, and there you can really see the prominence of these black bands. These perforations through space, that free-flowing space, here again you see replicated in the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts interior, where you've got these perforations between walls and rooms, and then again banded with the black to create this sense of the floating elements of the white walls. And then here you've got that enclosed courtyard, which was designed for sculpture. And sculpture was a really important aspect of architecture for Mies van der Rohe. And the sculpture activates the space, and the space activates the sculpture. They were working in tandem with one another. And so I included that photograph on the right-hand side so that you get a sense of how, when you're in the opposite administrative spaces, you had this perforation and sight line to the courtyard so that the sculpture becomes a part of your experience even when you're inside the space. Here are some of those. Here's the courtyard at nighttime lit. So on your right-hand side is a photograph of the new National Gallery in Berlin from 1968. And then on the left-hand side is the original staircase for the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts, created 4 years prior to that. You can see the visual correspondences, but perhaps it's the most visually corresponding when you look at these two images side by side. So you've got the KIA's staircase on the left-hand side, and then the Mies design staircase for the new National Gallery on the right-hand side. The new National Gallery has since been renovated, which is why you're seeing it with the white paint. And then here, this sketch by George Danforth on your right-hand side, you'll see the angle of that sculpture sort of positioned there on the right-hand side of that sketch. This angle is a little bit different, but if you can sort of picture the vista that's being created, you would be standing in what is today's lobby, looking down this long hallway, and it would be punctuated by the sculpture, so positioned very similarly to the Danforth sketch. Here is the facade of the Art Center juxtaposed against Mies's design for the museum for a small city, and remove the mountains in the backdrop. And I see a lot of visual correspondences there. So I mentioned that George Danforth was one of Mies's students, and then went on to become the dean of the School of Architecture at IIT. And then I came across this fascinating little tidbit here. So I'm just going to read it out loud to you because it might not be super legible from where you're sitting. So this is part of an oral history project that was compiled by the Art Institute of Chicago. And the interviewer says, all of a sudden, in the midst of something completely different, just as an aside, have you ever seen the museum in Kalamazoo, Michigan? I believe it was designed by somebody at Skidmore. George Danforth says, yes, it was a Skidmore job, I think. If I'm not mistaken, that was Bill Dunlop. Years ago, I did see it. The interviewer says, it's a very successful brick and glass construction. Danforth says, it's very successful. It's quite nice. For a couple of years, way back in the 60s, I think it was, I did consulting for Upjohn for their whole campus, meaning their research activity, their whole industry over there. I was consulting with them for a couple of years on placement of buildings and relationships, sort of a master plan. That's when I had a chance to go through the museum. That was in the early 60s, as I recall, not terribly long after I came back from Cleveland. And the interviewer says, I don't think they've changed it much over the years either, luckily. I had no idea that George Danforth also consulted with the Upjohn Company, and I just have to say, the more I learn about Upjohn and his support for artists and architects, it's very moving. I'm like totally floored by it. Oh dear. Okay. Thank you. So I'm happy to take any questions, reminiscences, thoughts. Did you believe me? Are you convinced? Yeah.
So was there ever a conflict between curators and architects that is so much light and the risk to the art were curators not so worried about that at the time?
That is such a great question. And that conflict endures to this day. So I don't know if you've had a chance to go to Michigan State's Zaha Hadid designed museum for the Bird Museum on Michigan State's campus. It's a glorious piece of architecture, but my God, it's like one of the hardest places to show art in. I mean, the building itself is an artwork, but if you want to hang a painting in there, like, good luck to you. Like, none of the walls are straight. And anyway, I digress. But yes, back then there was a lot of conversation between curators, because it's not an ideal space to show art. And if the curators for the KIR are here, I'm sure they'll tell you that they struggle with all of the light infiltration from that really long curtain glass wall, how to mitigate that. And this is also back in the 60s, so they didn't have double pane glass. So you have a lot of condensation, a lot of moisture to deal with. They might be dealing with moisture now. I don't know with the scaffolding. So, modern construction, modernist buildings, while gorgeous to look at are just nightmares in terms of upkeep. So yeah, there was definitely a lot of, I don't have specific cases of conflict here, but there's a lot of writing when you look at the archives between curators and architects, just like, where are we gonna show this piece? Or what do we do with that? Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Well, the people who worked in that building in Upjohn's headquarters didn't like it quite so much. Because it was drafting, and it was a little bit overwhelming. And that the transmission they used on the pipes gave off, when it degraded, it produced poisonous gas.
Oh, jeez.
That's probably why
So he was saying that some people who are working in Building 88 didn't necessarily love that experience either, because you might be in a modern architect masterpiece, but just comfort levels with HVAC and condensation, drafts, and also like the release of poisonous gas. This was also the first time that there was building interior air conditioning. And so, yeah, I've heard from quite a few people that the mechanicals and things, the actual physical experience of living or working in Building 88 was challenging. And it's interesting because, Corbusier, who's one of these international style architects, he designed the Villa Savoy, which is this iconic piece of architecture. You can still visit it today. But for the people who lived in the Villa Savoy, I mean, there's just photographs of those huge plate glass windows are just covered in moisture and condensation and wetness. And so I can imagine, it's a lot of, on the one hand, aesthetically beautiful, on the other hand, not the most comfortable thing to live in. Yeah.
My own mother worked for Upjohn in Building 88, and she called it the Taj Mahal.
Yes.
Is what they were referring to. And my mother also fell in front of Building 88. And it was never the same.
I'm so sorry. That is very hard. For people who might not have heard that, the speaker's mother worked in Building 88 and unfortunately slipped and fell in front of it and was never the same after that. I'm so sorry.
I worked in Building 88 for many years. I was young enough that maybe I never noticed that it was too hot or too cold or whatever. Maybe I would when I was older. I don't know. But in regard to falling, I don't know what those floors were made out of. Were they marble?
They were marble, yeah.
They were absolutely gorgeous. They were absolutely slippery. The maintenance guys would polish them to a glorious sheen. And I would take my brand new shoes to a shoemaker and have him put rubber on the bottom, on the leather sole, so that this was in the days of dressy shoes, of course, so that I wouldn't fall on those beautiful floors.
Yeah, they look very slippery. When I first moved to Kalamazoo, it was the summer after the building had been taken down. And I heard these stories of people like taking their trucks out and just because, you know, it was demolished. And so there's all of this marble just lying around. So you would grab the marble and, you know, use it for your gardens. And so there's pieces of building 88, like all around Kalamazoo, I think. But yeah, incredibly slippery. There's also this funny little excerpt where the bottom of the pools in building 88 were gold leaf, but they didn't want people to know it was gold leaf because then it would be too extravagant. And so they said, just say it's yellow paint, but it was gold leaf.
Hi, couple things. First of all, did you notice the person the director of the museum was talking to was Walt Disney?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, did I forget to say that out loud? I did. Oh.
Anyway, and you know, Upjohn had a huge, they brought artists in from other places. That's why we have wonderful Audubon Stauffenberg murals, not only in the ceiling of City Hall, but in the bank building.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they brought in Corbusier to speak. George Nelson has been here, built a house in Kalamazoo. The legacy of the Kalamazoo Art Center is extraordinary. And D.S. Gilmore and Walt Disney were very good friends because they lived near each other in Palm Springs in this complex, which I foolishly thought that I could just go drive around and see. So I made this pilgrimage to Palm Springs, and it's gated. And the gate person was very nice, but he's like, no, you really just can't go back there. But Walt Disney was also an aficionado of modern architecture. And so they both have these like fabulous sort of 60s atomic ranches back there, I guess, since I haven't seen it.
Yeah, did the museum for a small city originally had also a school component or a community component?
That's a great question. They use the word community all the time, but I don't know that they explicitly said like art making. He has a sentence in there that he wants large spaces in the museum for large gatherings of people, but I don't think he was thinking necessarily about an art school component. And from what I understand, that was pretty revolutionary for its time to combine the two together like that. And you know, we're so fortunate with that legacy today.
Having grown up here and had access to this all my life, it's not taken for granted because it's beautiful and I love it. It feels like art church to me. But I've had friends come in from all over the country who have said, "Oh, we have nothing like this in our world. We don't. There's nothing that is the same."
Absolutely. I've had colleagues come from major cities and be just wowed by our collection and just the resources that we have with this place. So we're very, very lucky. Well, I mean, I just try to stand in front of the Helen Frankenthaler at least, you know, once every couple months. I just still can't believe that we have that to look at. It's such an extraordinary piece.
To dovetail what you were saying, I used to work at Kawai Pottery, and I have a couple of friends who were artists at Kawai Pottery, and they came to visit, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and I took them back to show them the ceramic studio, and they were just amazed at how complete our studios are, and the resources that we have, and the space that we have, and the instructors, and you know, and one of my friends was a tile maker at Kawai, and she kept walking around looking and saying, "Well, I've never had this. I've never had this." You know, so they were, and you're right, we do take it for granted. We just kind of think, "Oh, this is what this is." It's special, very, very special.
Absolutely. Actually, so one of my professors in undergrad became a curator at the University of Michigan of Art, and she told me that she would bring her students down here to see their kilns because it was, you know, they didn't have that at Michigan. So yeah, we are just extraordinarily fortunate, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, they really invested in, I mean, it's just an embarrassment of riches with the Gilmore Piano Festival and the Car Museum, the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts, the Civic Theater. Yeah, it's really unparalleled.
I appreciate and am sympathetic to all these positive comments.
Why do I sense a butt coming?
Does anybody think that the building, I'm going to be shot for saying this, doesn't fit in downtown Kalamazoo? The churches around, the church square, all the other different older type structures.
Well, you bring up, also, homes were demolished to build this location. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I was really involved in the conversations that brought the Arca Center architects to Kalamazoo. And it's really in how you think about context, right? So if you're thinking about this particular 4 street corners that meet, it doesn't resemble anything around it. Given the context of when it was built, it kind of makes sense, right? It was this idea of out with the old, in with the new. So yeah, it doesn't fit in that sense. And so yeah, it doesn't fit in that sense.
I'm not saying it doesn't fit either.
Well,
It's just different enough that you kind of scratch your head sometimes.
It's kind of like, when you're in West Main Hill, the neighborhood back behind Kalamazoo College, and a lot of those are historical homes that were built in the early part of the 20th century. And then you see a home that was very much built in the 1950s and 60s that is trying to have a conversation with those homes. And I find that conversation really interesting. So it's, for me, I like the vitality and distinction of having, when you look at downtown Kalamazoo, there are some gorgeous examples of Art Deco buildings, Federalist style. I kind of like that we have these wonderful examples from different time periods. I think I prefer that over the sort of uniformity of one particular style, but I can totally see how people would disagree. I guess that's what's fun. That's what's fun about art, right? We can disagree about it, yeah.
There was not a lot of frankly right buildings
Yes.
in our community, and in the connection to that, I think if you go to Galesburg and you go through those homes there, if you're in, what's the place that Roger was in? Harwood Village, there's still a lot of representation there, and we're lucky that we have all of it.
Right. We're lucky that we have so many examples of really high-level architecture from all different types of periods, whether it's late 19th century, early 20th century, mid 20th century, and 21st century. We've got the MacArthur genius architect with a building in Kalamazoo. So we have a legacy of supporting innovative work that I'm really proud of. Yeah.
In that, part of that conversation made me think of a visit I had to Columbus, Indiana.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
very well known for its design and architecture, and has actual tours
Mhm.
of like 20, maybe more structures that you can drive around town and see. They're very different from each other. So, and we have a lot in Kalamazoo we can celebrate in the same way. I wish there was somebody we could maybe give an idea to promote some of the different architects and structures.
Absolutely. And, Cummins, who was the sort of foundational for Columbus, Indiana, Upjohn was really part of this Midwest Silicon Valley period of the 1950s and 60s, where you had, Watson at IBM, you had Cummins in Indiana, and then you had Upjohn here in Michigan, that were really seeding excellent architecture across the Midwest. So, and there's a lot of Frank Lloyd Wrights here. So it's sort of an embarrassment of riches just within like a 3-4 hour drive of us to get to experience a lot of these sites. And, it's in conjunction with coming out of World War II, there was a lot of federal money being poured into encouraging industry to move out to more rural, harder to reach locations, with the idea that if we were going to get bombed, it's harder to take us out in the Midwest than it is if you're on either coast. So for tax reasons and aesthetic reasons and for a variety of different reasons, there's a reason why the Midwest was so central to architectural development in the 50s and 60s. All right. Oh, sorry, one last comment.
For a small city opened up for other cities, other than Kalamazoo,
Can you say that one more time?
was a museum for a small city opened up for other cities too.
It's just a concept.
It was just a concept drawing that Mies was proposing. But there are some, so we've got the Berlin example, then we've got the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts. I read about one that I haven't visited somewhere in the United States that also was adopting and interested in it. But when I looked at the actual plans of it, it doesn't seem as closely aligned with the plans. But I'm sure they're out there, we just don't know about them quite yet. So anytime you go to a museum now in a small city, just to keep an eye out. We can build our inventory. All right, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.